Good morning, everyone. So welcome to our third class about the Introduction to Security. I'm Van Linh from the Department of Computer Science and Information Engineering. And today I want to introduce one of the critical term about the software vulnerabilities. Actually, this is one of the root cause for everything in security. So I hope everyone can know what is this and how we can determine software vulnerabilities in practice. Okay. First, you can see the vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities. We can see that is root cause of many security problems, like root cause for hacking, root cause for try to access or try to store the information. So we'll see what is kind of software vulnerabilities. Okay, so about the definition, we'll see software vulnerabilities. That's kind of defect, the software defect or the weakness in some program, and because all the internet on the computer system run in a software, right? So if the software have a defect or some flaw or some weakness, so the hacker can exploit, so and can give to the access to the system and try to steal the information like the credit card information, and can try to break down the whole system. And you can see in the left side, you go login, and the hacker maybe can use a kind of the SQL injection, and they can you see if some coder or developer develops one is very sloppy code. If you see on the screen, if the developer do not have an input validation to the password, so the hacker just input a kind of special string like or // So after the hacker enters this kind of string to the login form, and he can click sign in very easy. And evenly he do not know what is password, what is the new username. So this is kind of one example for the SQL injection. So when we look more, what is SQL injection? But this one is kind of vulnerabilities. Hacker try to exploit because this code by some sloppy developers. They do not have experience about the secure coding. Yeah. So that's you can see after you enter kind of special string. So just screen can show the own user, or eventually you can log in very easy. So this is happen very common in practice. And I think this one is quite critical and still happen over the world. And but can show you what is a kind of software vulnerability. And here is quite a simplest virus code. Actually, this virus is named Code-RES. It's kind of worm, cause billions of dollars of damage in the summer about the 2021. So actually it's about 20 years ago, 20 or 24 or 3 years ago. Actually, if you see the virus is very simple, just have one comments code to kind of very special string, and exploit kind of buffer overflow. And after get this kind of launch this kind of link to the kind of special port like TCP port 80. To the IIS, that's one of common, the Microsoft Internet Information Server, like a website. Yeah, the web server in the web service in the Microsoft the Windows the system, operating system. So hacker just pass this link to the kind of program and just call it, and you see suddenly the website just got hacked, and you can see in the screen a hacked by Chinese. Actually, this one is kind of the first worm over the world try to see they can exploit some special the vulnerabilities in operating system or in IIS from the Microsoft Windows. So In practice, so what about the other vulnerability? So in practice, you can see we have many kind of the other source like a software bug. Yeah, I think you often hear about this one. Like you can have a error, you can have flaw in the design. You have some software just code by a million or thousand line of code. So something that you forgot, right? You forgot how to how you can validate the input, something like that. So a hacker try to exploit and try to test and figure out where is a kind of have a bug, so they can exploit that bug. And you can see on the screen that is very common. You can runtime bug and from the Microsoft and just because we have a kind of buffer flow problem. Yeah, so we will learn about the buffer flow problem later, but this one is a very famous problem because this very often happen in practice because the developer just try to declare the variable in the programming, and something like they use kind of fixes the length for the variable, and the hacker just try to put more data than the kind of fixed length block the memory, so that can create a kind of crash for whole the software. So buffer flow still kind of big trouble for many kind of current software. So you can see in practice to sure which vulnerability is a high risk than the other. They use kind of vulnerability classification. So in screen you can see they define by the common the vulnerability scoring system. So if the higher value is better, like higher value like 1.0 or 0.99 or 0.9. So that means the vulnerability very high risk and can exploit by the the hacker. If the vulnerability score up to about 1, that means already have someone try to exploit by some automated the tool. So actually you can see this kind of score, the CVSS in the several websites, like CVE. Okay, remember in our security, this kind of website is very famous and very common because you can see when the expert talk about security, they always talk about specific the CVE library. Yes, that's kind of the vulnerabilities error. So you can see CVSS score between about 9 and 10. If the 10 is very high risk, so you can go to the cve.org and cvedetails.com. So you can see some information about detail about software vulnerability, and so important how you can launch attack based on that information. So you can see here the other source for the vulnerability. You can go to the OWASP. Okay, remember the other term important in security, OWASP. OWASP that's kind of open source and can help teach you mostly everything about from the beginning. Like can teach you what is a buffer flow, what is kind of heartbleed block, and what's about the SQL injection or some CSS or XSS the attack. So I encourage you can go to the that's a website to look more detail, because in future we will have more information about how we can exploit this kind of the resort to benefits for the hand-on the project. Yeah, because this is open source, so I encourage you go there. Everything is free. Yeah, it's free. And here is one copy for virus. Okay, if you see this one is too difficult to understand, that's fine. Yeah, we will look more detail in the next lesson. Just key point in this class, you see the copy virus. This is right in the in the assembly, and the virus to make sure is small, so they write in a kind of the low level language, and this virus they can try to exploit some some of the vulnerabilities, because software book, yeah, software book. Okay, so the question maybe someone would ask about the Windows, Linux, or Mac OS vulnerability. Which one is have a higher? So this is very difficult, but just one thing I can answer. Which operating system is more popular? Maybe it's more vulnerable to the security attack or vulnerabilities. Because you have a more user. So maybe the hacker try to focus because they have a more benefit, or they can have more, broad victim. Okay, so that means Windows or Linux, which one? It depends. We cannot determine which one can have a more vulnerabilities. Currently, Windows maybe have a more market size, but maybe Mac OS become a more popular in future. Okay, so about our today's lesson, we already talked about what is a vulnerabilities, and we see the software vulnerability is a root cause for everything security problem. And software vulnerability can come from the sloppy coding, come from bug, come from the flaw, come from the kind of some the defects or some the weakness. And the last thing, the own software and program or operating system own way, I emphasize, own way have vulnerabilities. That's why we need to have a security expert, and security is still a kind of very hard problem in future, not just for now. Okay, see you everyone to next lesson. We will learn more about the technology.